Picture a high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar race literally happening right above our heads. For decades, the commercial skies have been ruled by this quiet, seemingly unbreakable duopoly. But now, a brand new challenger has emerged from the east. It's shrouded in national pride, and it's carrying the absolute weight of a superpower's ambition. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on Project Sky Monopoly. We are looking at the COMAC C-919, China's gleaming new commercial passenger jet. Now, on the surface, this thing represents a monumental leap in aerospace engineering. But as we're going to discover today, the real story of the C-919 is actually a dramatic technological Cold War. It's packed with covert strategies, intricate supply chains, and a desperate race against global sanctions. To really wrap our heads around the C919, we first have to understand the mission itself. The global commercial aviation market is basically a fortress, and it's heavily guarded by two giants, America's Boeing and Europe's Airbus. Breaking into this club, it isn't just about building a plane. It's about national prestige, it's about total economic independence, and ultimately, it's about geopolitical power. China's explicit goal, which they've laid out in their own ambitious industrial plans, is to completely shatter this Western aerospace dominance. The COMAC C919 is their chosen weapon. It's a narrow-body airliner precision designed to go head-to-head with the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. Just look at this headline for a moment from the South China Morning Post. This is the news behind today's video. Here's how China plans to sanction-proof its C919 passenger jet. Aviation expert Zhang Yangjung, who played a leading role in developing the C919, warns of a real risk of being cut off from supply chains. With that said, let's go straight to the intro. The algorithm buries channels that show the truth like mine every single day. The only thing that fights back is you. One like, one subscribe, turn on the bell icon. That's how the truth about China survives on YouTube. Don't let it disappear. Thank you very much. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The C919 has successfully taken to the skies, and it's officially flying commercial routes right now. Domestically, it's hailed as this absolute triumph of Chinese engineering, a total homegrown marvel. But if you examine the blueprints closely, a very different truth starts to emerge. The C919 is flying for sure, but whose technology is actually keeping it in the air? Is this truly an indigenous triumph? Or is it basically a carefully assembled puzzle of foreign innovation? Let's get into Section 1, the illusion of independence. To really understand this illusion, we have to look beneath the aircraft's painted fuselage and dissect its anatomy. Let's look at some data pulled directly from the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. This is basically a declassified evidence dossier. Look closely at the critical systems here. The engines? Imported from the US and Europe. The avionics? The electronics that actually fly the plane, sourced through a US-China joint venture that relies heavily on imported core tech. The flight control systems? Also imported from the West. Literally, the only purely domestic column here is the final assembly. So, the C919 might be wearing a Chinese uniform, but its beating heart and its nervous system are undeniably Western. Aerospace expert Richard Abulafia really hit the nail on the head here regarding the harsh reality on the ground. In his testimony, he bluntly states that these highly complex, vital components are basically just imported into China from places like France, the UK, Germany, and are merely assembled in China. The crucial takeaway here is that right now, the C919 is incredibly vulnerable. It relies almost entirely on an open, willing Western aerospace ecosystem to survive. If those supply lines were cut today, the entire C919 fleet would be grounded. Period. Moving on to Section 2, the brain of the machine. In any modern commercial jet, the avionics are the intricate nervous system, right? They're processing millions of data points every single second just to keep the aircraft safely in the sky. Enter the IMAP, the Integrated Modular Avionics Platform. This is the central brain of the C919. It provides all the high-bandwidth data networking, general-purpose computing, remote data interfaces, the whole shebang. But COMAC didn't build this alone. This incredibly sophisticated system is provided by Aviation Systems, which is a joint venture between the American industrial giant GE and China's state-owned Avic. And get this, it's built on the exact same open architecture tech foundation as the systems used in the Boeing 787. This platform is what actually makes the C919 a viable modern airliner. This shared expertise essentially built the aircraft's core capabilities, from vital core processing and display systems all the way to flight data recording and intricate maintenance networks. This joint venture was absolutely instrumental in getting the C919 off the ground. When you track their milestones, it reveals a really deep collaboration, which ultimately culminated in the aircraft successfully achieving its type certificate back in 2022. Without this massive transfer of shared expertise and technology, there is simply no way the C919 would be flying passengers today. Alright, Section 3, the whole nation scheme. Look, China is acutely aware of its vulnerabilities, and they know the geopolitical winds are shifting fast. I mean, what do you do when your flagship national project is utterly dependent on your greatest geopolitical rivals? Well, their solution is what Beijing calls the new type whole nation system. This is a massive state-led 5-in-1 model. It integrates government directives, private and state-owned companies, universities, research institutions, and end consumers into one unified force. It's essentially a top-down mobilization designed to spark indigenous tech breakthroughs and bypass US export controls entirely. It's the ultimate authoritarian strategy to just brute force their way to technological independence. And we can actually see this technological Cold War escalating on a very precise timeline. Back in 2018, the US began heavily restricting high-tech exports to China on national security grounds. In direct response to that, by 2022, China's top leadership officially approved the blueprint for this new whole nation system. Which brings us to 2026 with the unveiling of their 15th five-year plan. This plan launches massive mega projects with frankly staggering investments, specifically targeting the creation of homegrown aircraft engines and advanced aviation tech. The race to decouple is officially in overdrive. The contrast between the current reality and China's ultimate endgame is pretty stark. Right now, their vulnerability is massive. A profound reliance on Western engines, avionics, and flight controls means the C919 is entirely subject to the looming threat of US tariffs and sanctions. But take a look at their counteroffensive, the sanction-proof plan. Aviation experts in China have laid out a really strict, aggressive roadmap. They are frantically accelerating the development of the ACI CEAC CJ1000A, their domestic engine. They're pushing for indigenous auxiliary power units and substituting foreign processors with domestic chips. It is a systematic, decades-long plan to rip out and replace every single foreign component before Western sanctions can ground their fleet. Which leads us to Section 4, next steps. So where does this global standoff go from here? Well, the tech war is rapidly escalating, and the battle lines in the sky have firmly been drawn. China is pouring limitless resources into fast-tracking the certification of the CJ1000A engine, desperately hoping to swap out the Western engines currently on the C919 as soon as humanly possible. They're aggressively expanding their state-led system to force breakthroughs in advanced materials and software. Meanwhile, the US and its allies are continually pushing to tighten the grip, further restricting the export of high-end chips and critical tech. As aerospace experts warn, replacing these incredibly complex, highly regulated systems isn't going to happen overnight. It is a long-term, arduous task that's going to take decades. It's a frantic push for absolute self-reliance against an increasingly closed-off global market. And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. The C919 is a beautiful piece of machinery for sure, but it's also a flying paradox, a massive symbol of Chinese ambition that is currently kept aloft by Western ingenuity. As we wrap things up, it's clear the true tech war for the skies is honestly just beginning. Will China's whole nation scheme actually succeed in sanction-proofing their flagship jet, or will the Western duopoly maintain its iron grip on the future of flight? That is the multi-billion-dollar question we are going to be watching very closely. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating topic today. I hope this deep dive helped bring the complex reality of global aviation into focus. Until next time, goodbye and keep looking up.